I'd like to call the Gurnee Village Board regular meeting of January 25th, 2021 to order. Roll call, please.
Thorstensen.
Here.
Ross.
Here.
Garner.
Here.
O'Brien.
Present.
Thomas.
Present.
Hood. Here. 6 present.
All right, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, well, welcome everybody. We have a lot of important things on the agenda tonight, and we start off with approval of consent agenda as presented. Do I have a
So moved.
motion?
Second.
Motion by trustee Balmas, second by trustee Garner. Roll call, please.
Thorstensen.
Yes.
Ross.
Aye.
Garner.
Aye.
O'Brien.
Aye.
Thomas.
Aye.
Hood.
Yes.
6 aye.
Motion carries. Patrick, please read the consent agenda into the record.
Item number 1, approval of the minutes from the January 4th, 2021 meeting. Item number 2, approval of ordinance 2021-02, extending the moratorium on the establishment of smoke, vape, or hookah shops and/or lounges. Item number 3, approval of ordinance 2021-03, authorizing the purchase of software and product licenses from CDW Government LLC and execution of an enterprise agreement with Cisco Systems. Item number 4, approval of a bid letting date of January 26, 2021 for 2021 bridge to deck repair project. Item number 5, approval of payroll for period ending January 1st, 2021 in the amount of $865,112.92. Item number 6, approval of payroll for period ending January 15th, 2021 in the amount of $802,022.75. Item number 7, approval of bills for period ending January 25th, 2021 in the amount of $1,463,024.34.
Thank you, Patrick. Do I have a motion to
Second.
approve?
So
Motion
moved.
by trustee
Second.
Garner,
Second.
second by trustee Ross. Roll call, please, Andy.
Thorstensen.
Yes.
Ross.
Aye.
Garner.
Aye.
O'Brien.
Aye.
Thomas.
Aye.
Hood.
Yes.
6 aye.
All right, motion carries. We have no petitions and communications tonight, so we're going to move on to reports because we have some significant ones. Our finance director, Brian Gosnell, is going to take us through all of them. So which one, I guess COVID-19 update first?
Yeah, we got 3 things to go through tonight. We'll touch on the COVID update. Some significant things happened there. Multi-year financial forecast. We'll just hit some highlights there and then hit the outcomes. And then spend a little more time on the capital plan that is really foreshadows what's going to come up here in the budget in the next few months as we go through that process. So COVID update. I'll skip the less exciting things and just go right to, we expect to be back to Tier 1 tomorrow. That'll allow indoor dining, obviously with some restrictions and distancing and hours limits and things like that. But that is a step forward, particularly when it comes to food and beverage tax. Then obviously, the vaccine is moving into phase 1B, I believe is what it's called. So that is continuing to move forward. So good news on that front. Hopefully that continues. Big 3, Six Flags, obviously closed for the season. Gurnee Mills is open with limited safety protocols, capacity limits. And then Great Wolf is temporarily closed pending indoor water park restrictions. So as soon as they can get that open, they will open up. I don't know that they have heard one up or down with the Tier 1 restrictions yet. So at least not as of today. So still working their way through that. Getting into the numbers a little bit, we're looking at through December here. Last year, collected just over 30.4 million. This year, almost 24.7. Gives us down almost 5.8 million or 19% here. And this is total general fund revenues. We updated the projections a little bit with another month of sales tax. Last month, we'll talk a little bit more about it when we get there, but That was trending in a good direction. So originally, we had looked at about a $10 million or 25% drop in total general fund revenues. Updated that, I think, 2 reports ago to 9.2 million. It looks like we can update that and be a little less conservative with only, 3 months to go here of collections, and get that right to about 8.2. Big difference we saw there was the sales tax. We were down, I think it was 1.5% for that 1 month. We weren't sure if that was a trend or an anomaly. We were down 6.5% for the most recent receipts, so it's as close to a trend as we'll get based on what we saw earlier in the year. So we changed that assumption, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Big four, sales tax, amusement tax, hotel tax, food and beverage tax. Here's where all the 8.2 million is. Through December last year, collected about 17.3, almost 11 million, down almost 6.4 million or 36.8%. And again, you see the mix here. It projected to end the year down 33%, 8.2 million. Sales tax, 2.9 of that. Amusement tax, 3.1. Those two are kind of vying for who's going to be leading the charge here. Hotel tax down 1.4 million, and then food and beverage down 830,000. Obviously, as we just talked about, sales tax and amusement tax are right in line with each other as far as overall dollar impact. Sales tax, so here's where we changed the projection. We originally had this down 25% for the remaining 4 months at that point. We updated that to 15%. We felt like with the 1.5 and then the 6.35% percent down, that was trending in a good direction. And you can see we had a 12 and a 17 before that, so we thought 15 was appropriate. That brings us to a total of just about 14.3 million or 3 million down from last year. On the amusement tax side, here again, we're looking at 3.1, although we did see some for the month of January. January receipts so far, we did see some strength with the holiday and the park lights events and things like that, but still leaving that at 90% down. Obviously, that ended halfway through January here. Still leaving that at 90% down. If that holds true, we'll end 3.1 down on the amusement tax side. Hotel tax, we're at assuming 90% drop for the remaining months. That has not changed. Obviously, if Great Wolf opens, that changes this dynamic greatly. But assuming 90% holds, about 1.46 million down on the year in hotel tax, and then food and beverage. As we noted earlier, and I actually had some updated numbers for January. It came in better than we had expected. So about 830 to 850 down here in the end. Again, dining opening up could change these numbers as well. So being conservative at 50% down for the remaining months, but dining gets open, obviously only a good direction to go there. On the expenditure side, year-to-date, or through December, versus the seasonally adjusted budget, they're 9.3%, or almost 2.8 million ahead. We originally projected this to be about 3 to 5 million in savings. It looks like we're going to end up on the higher side of that. Still projecting about 4.6 or about 11% savings on the expenditure side through the end of the year. Obviously, most of that is personnel related. As you know, we still have 12 and a half open positions right now, either vacated or budgeted and remain unfilled. Brings us to fund balance. Through December last year, we added almost 46,000 to fund balance. Through December of this year, we've used 2.2 million for a negative variance of 2.3 million. Through December, again, I think we're going to hit that mark even as we get into budget and start looking at things a little more in depth. I think we're going to hit that mark of about 3 million at the end of the year, using 3 million in fund balance. So originally we thought it would be a little more. CARES grant and obviously revenues coming in better, being able to, maintain the expenditures and keep those positions open, obviously are going to help us here. So those year-end estimates that we walked through there really kind of set the stage for the forecast, because we use those, plug them right into the year-end estimate, and that tells us where we're going to go in the next year, in particularly, but in the forecast time frame, the next 5 years. Any questions on the COVID update?
Any questions? I mean, it's certainly much rosier than we thought, but we shouldn't get too exuberant yet. Temper our optimism.
Reopening in Tier 1 will
Yeah.
greatly help.
All right. There's no questions. Thank you.
Keep right on moving. So the financial forecast, just a little bit about why we do it, what it is. Really, the purpose of it is just to confirm the long-term sustainability of each individual fund, general fund, things like that. Identify any threats or services to operations or the capital plan. It's just a projection of potential outcomes. It is by no means an absolute indicator. From the time we published it to now, things have already changed. Obviously, the news today that we may move to Tier 1 will change some things. But it's pick a point in time, give us a scope of what we're looking at over the next 5 years is really what it is. Also confirms funding availability for the capital plan, which is the second piece. Typically, the forecast would be what we use to determine any surplus balance at the end of the year that would then flow into next year's capital plan. Obviously, there's not going to be a surplus this year, so the timeline of these merged, present them all on the same night. We basically did them at the same time together. But the capital plan identifies long-term strategy for replacing capital and infrastructure, really lays out the scope of our responsibilities in the document, and then gives us really an opportunity to preview what we have upcoming in the upcoming budget, and then set some priorities and things like that for the funding that we show being available for the next year and then 5 years out. It's just our financial planning and reporting process. Obviously, we're in the beginning of this with the long-term plans. That leads into the annual budget, which is underway, actually in a good spot. And then quarterly status reports, and then finally the audit or CAFR at the end of the year. Wraps everything up. Structure of the forecast, we did a little bit of a change here. Still 5-year history, current budget and estimate, and then a 5-year projection. We look at major revenues, major expenses, individually, and then kind of lump everything else in. So we try to target 75% of revenues, 75% of expenses, look at those in detail, and make broad assumptions on the rest of it. That helps us determine capital funding and then impacts the fund balance over the forecast period. Major general fund revenues. We look at 3 different scenarios, what we call a baseline scenario, an expansion, and a contraction scenario, or models. I'll talk a little bit more about those. But that changed this year from looking at how those would be impacted by a recession. That's how we typically had done those, to now, how are we going to bounce back from COVID? So we did quite a bit of update in the document and in the models to try to look at that. Added a couple funds here. This year, the Police Restricted Revenue Fund and the Fleet Services Fund. If you remember, during the budget last year, we added the Fleet Services Fund. This was the previous vehicle maintenance division within the general fund. Took it out, made it its own kind of business unit. It's still funded from the general fund, but also takes care of all the garage, quote-unquote garage work, and then vehicle replacements. Key decision points in the document. So these have kind of been developed over a number of years. Kind of some direction, broad direction that we've gotten. Use debt service for capital. We had fully intended to do that this year when we paid off the Series 2011 bonds. We had a $675,000 transfer from the general fund to the capital fund. That was the largest budgeted transfer, at least since in the last 5-6 years. The debt we do have, aggressively pay it down. We've included additional payment for the IEPA loan. Forecast includes some additional payments for Fire Station 3 as well. The water rate plan, we had a rate plan that we put into effect from fiscal year 17 to fiscal year 21. The last increase was May 1 of 2020. We looked at updating that plan for another 5 years, and as we got into modeling that and seeing what it would look like with what we needed for capital, there was too many unknowns with how water usage would bounce back, not to mention the impact of, any kind of rate increase that we would see coming off of COVID for residents. It just didn't seem like it would fit to have a new rate plan in place right now. So we thought we'd hold the rates where they're at, where they were at May 1, 2020 for a year, see what that bounce back looks like, and then project that going forward to see what that looks like. Water and sewer capital funding, we had planned drawdowns. If you remember the whole plan we put together with the JAWA rate drops, using some fund balance, and then rate increases in the previous plan. We have our last planned drawdown this year for finishing off the old Grand water main. Heather will talk more about that later. And then we have the IEPA loan debt service we talked about, additional for that. That is from the plan we put together in the capital funding plan that we started with in 2017. We have come to a point in the water and sewer that we can afford annually through rates. The debt service on the loan, an annual capital program of roughly $2 to $2.5 million, and then some meter work that we're doing as well. But again, we'll talk a little bit more about that when we hit the fund. And then Fire Station 3, obviously we did the promissory note using the Warren-Waukegan Fire Protection District contribution for debt service through 2026, at which time the village will pick up and make those payments. So that's just kind of background decisions that we've accumulated along the way that help us develop the forecast. Threats and opportunities, this we've seen with the COVID updates. A lot of this will cross over. Obviously, what does it look like coming out of the COVID-19 crisis? What is the long-term impacts to retail, housing, consumer habits? Always got to be aware of the state fiscal situation and what happens there and how that impacts revenues coming back locally. Changing sales tax landscape. Again, some COVID impact there, but also, internet sales. We've seen a huge jump during COVID of internet sales. Does that stick? Does it kind of retreat back to levels? There's thought on both sides of that we've heard over the last week. Personnel costs outpacing revenue growth. That is consistent across municipalities. We're certainly not unique in that area. Opportunities. 911 consolidation is still out there, although it seemed to take a little bit of a break during COVID, but we're still active in some RFPs and things that are going on in that arena. Workforce turnover, not only what we have currently vacant, but what's coming vacant in the next few years, managing that. And then what is the lasting impacts of COVID on the big three, and then continuing to invest in the East Grand Corridor, which we had started a few years ago with landscaping and some of those things. Moving to the general fund, so looking at major revenues, this makes up 71% of the general fund. Split those out into the big four and then the other four, but in total make up major revenues. We've been focusing on the big four with COVID, so we thought we kind of split those out. But those are the revenues that we look at in detail and model using the three different models. So historically, what we've tried to do is take the theory of economic cycles and look at baseline model, which is just historical trend. The expansion model tries to capture the growth coming out of a recession, and then contraction models captures going into the trough and then the trough. COVID changed all that. So what we did was for the baseline model, we tried to look at how the big four in particular were going to bounce back from the COVID impact. So the baseline model says we'll get 75% back of what we lost based on a normal year. So historically what has been a normal year. We get 75% back to a normal year in next year, and then we get 100% back in 2023. The expansion model, 100% of what we have lost comes back immediately next year. And then for those revenues that aren't the big four, that weren't quite as impacted from COVID, we looked at the higher limit of historical growth. So what was the high water mark as far as annual year-over-year growth, and see what that looks like if that continues. On the contraction model, it took 3 years to recover from COVID, 50% next year, 75% the year after, and then 100% the year after that. For those that weren't impacted by COVID, we looked at the lower limit of historical growth. So that's kind of how the revenue modeling changed. Friday, I found some data and somebody else's work that substantiated kind of what we were looking at for the baseline model, getting back to 75% next year. So Moody's and CNN put together this back to normal index, they called it. They looked at 37 different national, state indicators and put together this model of how far back is each state from the bottom of the COVID crisis. Illinois, the national average was like 81. Illinois was at 70%. So if you consider any correlation between that, at least independent statistic, and what we were modeling as far as getting 75% back, we're not out of the realm of possibility by any means. So in total, this chart shows us major revenues in total for all three models. To the left of the kind of grayed out area, show off my newfound tool here. So, maybe. There we go. So here's the shaded area. This is budget and estimate, 5 years historical, 5 years moving forward. Blue line is the baseline model. The green is the expansion model, so 100% back next year. And then the yellow is the contraction model, which takes 3 years to get back. So you can see, if we're looking at normal years, and you just draw a line straight across, the green one comes back right away. 2 years out, the baseline model comes up, and then 3 years out, the contraction model comes up. So that's kind of, again, validating what we've done with the three models. So getting into what each one of those look like. So just, I'll run through these quick because we talk a lot about them with the COVID update. Sales tax obviously greatly impacted by COVID. This is a much more linear, straight line here. Assumes 12.7 as a normal year. You can see back here we hit 12.8, 12.8, a couple lower years, but projected 12.75 this year. So we use 12.7 as a normal year, and then how we would bounce back from that. Home rule sales tax, so that was municipal shared sales tax. There's a little bit of a difference in how they're impacted, just based on how the tax is applied. But again, here you see 2 years out, we used $4.5 million as a normal year. Blue line gets us back to a normal year in 2023. Amusement tax, here a normal year, $3.6 million. Again, the three scenarios kind of spread out over 3 years to get back to that normal. There's where the baseline adjusts back to normal. Hotel tax, same thing, $2 million for a normal year. Food and beverage tax, again, same models, $2 million here for a normal year. Then we get into use tax. So those are the big four. That was modeled based on bounce back from COVID. The rest of the major revenues were high and low limits. So we looked at use tax, and here's one that has been largely double-digit increases over the last couple years, but took a huge increase due to obviously COVID, people going online and shopping. If you remember, use tax is how we get that online sales tax, although it's not 100% of what we'd normally get in brick and mortar. But so the question here is this going to go back a little bit, or is it going to maintain? My initial thought was that it's gonna come down a little bit. I heard something completely different from the Chicago Fed in the seminar on Friday. They think it's either gonna continue to increase, just not double digits, or at least flatline. So that may be an adjustment that we look at when we get to the budget, see how it comes, how the next few months come in, make an adjustment there. But that's from a forecast standpoint, we did assume that it would drop. Telecommunications tax, we talked about this one multiple times, been declining steadily over the years, projected to continue to do so. And then building permits, obviously, we have some baseline permit revenue, and then we have large commercial projects that can throw this all over the place. Really what we looked at here was what's in the queue and what we can expect from a baseline standpoint. And then income tax, the last major revenue that we looked at, this is one that largely, the consensus was, and the IML thought, that it would drop by 5%. We have not seen it drop year over year for any month yet. So the thought is that it would be more of a lagging indicator. At some point, this is going to be impacted by COVID. So we looked at this one again and said, like use tax, will it have an impact next year, dropping down, and then leveling off back to where it was? So that's what we had programmed into the forecast. Then we look at major expenditures. So we had salaries, health insurance, property liabilities, work comp, pensions, and debt service, 72%. Again, we're trying to hit that 75% of each revenues and expenditures here. Won't go into a ton of detail on these. These have a lot less variables. We have a lot more control over these, so the assumptions stay pretty stagnant. We know what, a lot of these are personnel driven. We know what the head count's going to be, so they're easy to forecast. The one I did want to just talk a little bit about was debt service. Again, the chart, previous 5 years, current year budget estimate, 5 years in the future. You can see this red here is the Warren-Waukegan Fire Protection District contribution to that debt service. And then where it turns yellow here in 2026 is where the village takes over. So I just wanted to note that. That chart is in the forecast as well. This is paying off the Series 2011 bonds, obviously. So it brings us to the most important and probably most confusing chart in the forecast. This shows us where fund balance finishes in all three models. Again, this is the current year estimate. Where it finishes in all three models, obviously the expansion forecast, everything bounces back immediately and continues to grow at the upper limits. We have no issues. Baseline, we see bounce back after 2 years. However, in every forecast that you do, unless you make some general assumptions about new growth and things like that, you're going to see this because personnel costs outpace revenues. And then on the contraction model, obviously, it takes 3 years to bounce back, and growth is at the lower limit throughout the forecast. Obviously, if that trend picks up, we would have to make some adjustments. The good news about this chart is that if we did absolutely nothing, had no new growth, did not have historical budget surpluses, no change in the mix, didn't make any changes to revenue or expenditures, and everything came in historical average after 2 years, we wouldn't hit our fund balance policy until the 5th year. So again, if we did nothing, 5 years before we hit that policy. So that's the cushion that we've built in here. So what we talk a lot about in the last few iterations about bending this kind of curve up. So what types of things bend that curve up over time? Conservative budgeting. Historically, in the general fund, we've budgeted conservatively enough that on an average year, obviously of no recessions, no COVID, no anything like that, we see about $1 million surplus. The gap from here to there is $6 million. So if we have $1 million surpluses over that 5-year forecast period, we've already made up 5 of the 6. that just goes to show you how important conservative budgeting is to bending that curve up. Structural revenue or expenditure adjustments, obviously, if we, add a revenue or debt falls off, like we did when we paid off the Series 2011 bonds, those are structural changes to our revenue and expenditure mix. That will bend the cost curve up. New growth, not assumed in any of the forecasts, will bend that up. That's why that's, such an important thing. And then a change in the mix that increases the tax base. So you switch out a lower generating use for a higher tax generating use. Obviously, that adds to the tax base, bends that curve up in the long run. If we look at the last 5 iterations of the financial forecast, we see this at work. So I'll try to run through this quickly, but in fiscal year 17, when we did the forecast, fiscal year 21 was the 5th year, the furthest out year. We projected that would be fund balance at that time, in fiscal year 17, the ending fund balance in 21 would be $21.6 million. By the time we did the fiscal year 18 iteration of the forecast, that projection increased to almost 22 million. So we already made up some room there. When we got to fiscal year 19, that projection went to almost 24.5 million. If you remember, we did some amusement hotel tax adjustments in fiscal year 19, so that changed a couple things. Fiscal year 20, that projection moved to 25.9 million. So you can see the closer that fiscal year 21 came, and the more years that went by, conservative budgeting, new growth, all those things happened, that cost curve bent up. It was no longer 21.6 million, as we thought it would be in fiscal year 17 when we did that forecast. Now when we get to fiscal year 21, and we do the first out year, it's 26.8 million. Now after that, COVID hit and changed things a little bit, but that gives you an idea of how that fund balance changes over time, the closer you get to that target. Hopefully that explains it. So that's end of the general fund. Any questions on general fund balance, how that works? I guess, the question is why do we do a forecast that's so conservative? Well, it gives us an idea of what we need to accomplish. It gives us an idea of, it gives us something to measure against when we don't have $1 million surplus. We know, that against our benchmark is something we got to make up. When we're considering new growth or incentives or things like that, we always try to protect our base. That's why it's important to protect our base. Gives us an idea of how much we're chipping into that $6 million over that 5-year span that we got to make up. So, general fund questions?
None?
So revenues, or water and sewer fund, we talked about the rate plan. We did not build an increase in here. So when you look at the water and sewer fund annual operating deficit, understand there's no rate built in. If we build in just a modest rate, that changes drastically. We also assume a 0.5% annual drop in usage, just being more efficient. Same expenses as the general fund, except we also include detail on JAWA expense and how what they charge us drops, because that was a huge part of funding for capital that we put together 4 or 5 years ago. Drawdown in the water and sewer fund we talked about. That $2.9 million target that the study from 2011 said that we needed to fund for capital. We're very close. Between the capital plan, debt service, and meter program, we get to about 2.9, so we were able to make that up. Future, rate plans and things like that will be less about making up that gap and more about keeping pace with what we need to fund infrastructure. This chart just shows the water and sewer fund balance as a percentage. You can see we get way out here. It's still at 30% of operating expenditures. There is zero, as I said before, rate adjustments included in here. If you just tack on a 2.5 for just the sake of forecasting, Starting in fiscal year '23, this curve bends up dramatically, so. Looking at the capital fund here, again, from a forecast standpoint, we did not build in a general fund transfer. We did build in $150,000 annual from the impact fee fund. We used the baseline assumption for the home rule sales tax that funds capital. Included the Warren Waukegan Fire Protection District contribution to Fire Station 3. Obviously, the expenses here align with the multi-year capital plan. And then our fund balance target here is about $1 million. Just keeping some in there in case something happens, some dramatic infrastructure issue that we need to fund. This gives us $1 million cushion before we have to start looking at general fund balance. Motor fuel tax fund dedicated to road resurfacing is about $850,000 annually. We saw that supplemented this year with some Rebuild Illinois capital funds from the state capital plan. We had typically utilized this every other year. With COVID, we utilized it every year for at least the next two to keep that program going, give some relief to the capital fund. And then at the very end here, you can see I just included this relief valve. So we started talking about this a little bit with last year's budget, how using these restricted funds can provide relief to other funds and ultimately some of them to the general fund even. But by not spending them in good years, you let that balance build up, so then in years like COVID, that are impacted, we can use those funds, still maintain a good capital plan, and keep infrastructure, vehicles, and equipment, things like that, rotating. This is one of those funds, Police Restricted Revenue Fund. We get funds in here from different cases. We looked at what's pending out there and what we could forecast to come in, use it for capital equipment. We did include a little bit in here of the K-9 program. It's a good nexus with what these funds are to be used for. And again, this is one of those funds that in a year like this year provides some relief with that fund balance, not only to the general fund, because we can use some of this for the K-9 program and some minor capital that would normally be budgeted in the general fund, but also some capital vehicles and things like that. We'll talk more about when we get to the capital plan. But vehicles and things like that we can buy out of here one time and provide some relief to the capital fund and the fleet service fund. And then fleet services fund, obviously we did this one last year, put this one in. It's funded by operating transfers from the general fund, water and sewer operating fund, and the capital funds for the vehicle purchases. It's supposed to net to zero every year. Obviously, over time, conservative budgeting, this will also build up a balance. We had it build up a balance last year. It looks like we'll probably look to use at least a portion of that to relieve the general fund a little bit in fiscal year '23. So, '22. Sorry, a year ahead of myself. So, in conclusion here, just for the forecast side, obviously, how we come out of the forecast, or out of the COVID crisis is going to be huge. Managing that workforce turnover, looking at privatization where it makes sense. We've talked in the past about those less customer service-facing roles, kind of behind-the-scenes stuff that we can privatize. It gives us an opportunity to insource that stuff when we need to save on the budget. So that is something just that we should explore as we go through managing the workforce turnover. Obviously, pursue new growth. Look at diversifying revenue-based fund setup. We did fleet services last year. We may look at a couple of things next year as far as risk management, health insurance, things like that. Segregated one-time revenues, we do a good job of that right now. And then anything we're offering new service-wise or existing service, are we recovering what it costs in the fees that we charge? Or at least we know by how much we're not, if that's the case. So that is the forecast, which sets us up for funding available for the capital plan, which is the next step. Any questions on forecast?
Brian, do you think with the changes to the pension for police and fire under single management, will that have any impact? Or will we get better returns, or do we just not know yet?
I don't know enough yet to be able to say definitively one way or the other. My hunch is we're not going to benefit greatly from it. I think that's probably, I can put my glasses on here to see the chiefs over there, but obviously we've talked about it, and I think that's the consensus is, I don't know that's going to do much for us.
Okay. I was just wondering if there was a little pickup there. All right, questions? All right. It's better to know what you're facing than not know.
That is the idea for the forecast. So getting into capital plan. Funding strategy, we talked about this multiple times in the past, try to be pay-as-you-go as much as we can. General capital, so this is non-water and sewers, funded by home rule sales tax, motor fuel tax, general fund surplus, impact fees, grants, wherever we can find them. Water and sewer, we're looking at charges for service, and over the last few years anyway, we brought those reserves down a little bit to get some infrastructure going while we had those JAWA rate drops that came to fruition like we thought it would. And then from Fire Station 3 and the IEPA loan at least, find some flexible financing that we can aggressively pay down quicker to reduce those terms. So looking at overall plan here, this is by fund. Looking at fiscal year '22 first, proposed about $13 million. Total over the 5 years is pretty close to $50 million total. It's paid for from the 911 fund. There's some technology coming out of there. Motor fuel tax fund, PD restricted revenue fund, capital improvement fund, golf course fund, water and sewer capital improvement fund, and then fleet services where the vehicles and major equipment are paid from. This chart shows us breakdown by system. So we break the capital plan down into 6 different systems: transportation, stormwater management, technology, which is new this year. We actually broke it out for the budget last year, but that was after the capital plan. And we really thought it does a good job of showing how the village places an emphasis on technology to keep operations efficient, keep things moving, improve customer service. And it's a good chunk of money, so we thought we would highlight it. Vehicles and equipment, building and building improvements, and then the water and sewer system. And with that, Heather will go over the transportation system.
Can you hear me? Okay. All right, so with respect to the transportation system, in fiscal year '22, we got about 4.1 million, 3.4 of which is for rehab to road networks, 1.7 for street resurfacing, 1 million for the reconfiguration and signalization at Manchester Drive and Milwaukee Avenue, so to serve Fire Station 3, which will be hopefully offset by some grant funding that we're still hoping to get. 368,000 for improvements related to the Stern School Road Bridge overpass to enhance the pedestrian accessibility, which you guys voted on last year. And earlier this year, we discussed the Rebuild Illinois funds being used for that, which were approved. We also have 350,000 in patching and 50,000 in crack sealing to help bolster some of the roads that we were not able to get to this year as we intended. We have 225,000 for engineering consulting to help with inspections, which we typically do for our roadway program, just because they're widespread throughout the entire village. 140,000 for sidewalk improvements at the intersection of Hunt Club and Washington. This is part of the county's intersection improvement program. So we're going to be extending sidewalks south from Wildflower all the way north to the intersection and west from Hunt Club along Washington. And then we have about 125,000 in for streetlight upgrades as well, which I'll show you on the next couple slides, and 125,000 for the sidewalk program. So here's the area for the sidewalk program. It was actually in the budget last year, but due to COVID, we withheld this back a little bit and just kind of managed it through public works improvements of different ramps and things that people may have called about. So here it includes Providence Village, Providence Oaks, Country Trails, Fairway and Heather Ridge, South Ridge, and the Tri-State Business Park. Next, we have the road program. It might be a little hard to see, but down toward the bottom of the page, there was a purple street there, which was the reconstruction of Manchester. Otherwise, all the red is resurfacing jobs. So if you go to the next slide, see more detail. So in the northeast region, we have Cheyenne, we have Clearview, and we have Lee Avenue that are going to be rehabbed up there. Next. Here we have Kilbourne Avenue and Emerald Avenue that'll be done. Next. Here we have Vista, Panorama, and Revere Court. And lastly, we have Middle Pilgrim's Path, I believe it says there, and Mayflower Court. So there's other portions of roadway that'll get patching and the crack sealing that we discussed, but we don't map those out until we get a better feel of how much money we have to spend on those services. Here's the street lighting program. So this should be the final year of the LED upgrades, as we've mentioned. It was originally budgeted last year, again, held back, and so we're moving forward in this coming year. Some of the areas included are Pembroke, Steeple Point, Westgate, and Estates of Churchill Hunt. Moving on to Stormwater Management, we have about $450,000 programmed, $300,000 for the culvert at Waveland. It replaces 2 existing culverts with 3 36-inch diameter culverts. $100,000 for floodplain property demolition. This is mainly for the Dairy Queen and the salon that we just acquired recently. And $50,000 for land acquisition due to floodplain buyouts. Next. This is the location of the Waveland Culvert Project. It's south of Grand Avenue, right there on Waveland. For the water and sewer system, we got about $2.9 million in next year's budget, 1.5, as Brian mentioned, for Old Grand Phase 2, so that water main takes it from First all the way to Fire Station. $830,000 for the water main at the intersection of Hunt Club and Washington. As I mentioned before, we get sidewalk improvements, but there's also water main connection that's going to be done, taking us from Wildflower all the way up, I believe it's to, is it Southbridge? So it'll keep us connected and have better reliability. Here you can see on the next slide are the 2 project locations for the water main, both Waveland and Old Grand Avenue. Next, we move on to vehicles and equipment. So here we have about $1.1 million for the police department. As Brian mentioned earlier, there are some restricted funds for police that'll help fund the 4 unmarked vehicles once those revenues are realized. And the $384,000 left would be for the 3 squads and 1 evidence tech. As you probably remember, the squads do get rolled down to community development, so that's the way we save on that. We also have $58,000 for evidence tracking and gear. And in the fire department, we have $312,000 for the replacement of an ambulance, $25,000 for a potential 90-10 grant, $25,000 for warning siren maintenance. And in public works, the $310,000 for the upfitting of the 2 dump trucks. The chassis were purchased, if you recall, in November. So that's for a 10-yard and a 5-yard, and we'll
Heather.
outfit it next year. Yes.
The warning system, there'd been talk that a lot of that equipment, it's getting harder to find parts and stuff, and we were going to look at doing something else. Have we looked at that or studied whether we want to do something else?
I defer to the chief.
Chris also assists me with this quite often because of the technology. At this point, we've just continued to maintain the system that we have in place. We're not having any struggle with any parts or getting anything like that. We have a company, Radicom, that comes out annually, does inspections on it. They do it just prior to the season, so they'll be out next spring. And we've actually done very well with them. Every once in a while, we have a battery that goes bad, things like that within there. Long-term, I think the technology across the country, something people question using a warning siren versus the apps and different things like that. At this point, it's not a lot for us to maintain the system in place till we have probably better technology we can push out, but we weren't looking at moving right now at this point.
Okay. I thought there had been some discussion about it. Okay. Good job, Heather, thank you.
So technology, this is the one that we had split out this year, 1.4 million total, and Chris, stop me or jump in whenever if I mess something up here, but 1.4 million total. We really split this out into village-wide, so items that kind of affect all departments, and then individual department budgets here. So village-wide, 325 in village-wide stuff, including 60 for the cybersecurity enhancements. Administration, just a small amount for audio-visual upgrades in here. Police department, the big one is really CAD and RMS replacement that Chris and folks on the police department are heavily involved in this. hopefully I don't misspeak here, but like a joint RFP with Lake County, they're going through that process. Fire department, $35,000 for notification systems, and then some $75,000 for SCADA system upgrades in Public Works.
Then back to building improvements in the capital fund, we have about 3.2 million, which covers all the different departments. So for administration, if you recall, there was a monopole that we're trying to replace over at Cemetery Road Reservoir. That's about 55,000 split between the admin and water and sewer. Police department has 100,000 for improvements, including the condenser replacement, fire protection dry system, veterans memorial repairs, and indoor air handling upgrades. The fire department, obviously, the 2.3 million for the completion of Fire Station 3 construction, 250,000 then to outfit it with furniture, fixtures, and equipment. Moving on to water, sewer, and streets.
So real quick with the furniture and equipment in Fire Station 3, it looks like we may not need that in the ultimate budget, so you may see that drop off when we get to the budget process, but it may be a scenario where we have enough contingency built in the original contract and enough room in the loan that we can roll all that into the loan and not have any impact to the capital fund for FF&E next year for Fire Station 3. Sorry, Heather.
That's fine. For Public Works, streets, and for water and sewer, there's a couple that offset between the two. So there's floor drains in the main building. We took care of the south building last year. Now it's time for the main building drains. That gets split 50-50 between streets and water sewer. We have multiple man doors for both the main building and the south building. We're going to split that again between streets and water sewer. The monopole, as we mentioned on the previous slide, being split, the water sewer is here for 55,000. And the well house structure repairs, which includes roofing and siding at our well and Cemetery Road. So now I'll turn it back to Brian.
That is it for capital plan. So any questions on anything we've seen in there? Again, that's a precursor to what we'll see in the budget when we do that first presentation. Really where we're at. Any questions?
All right, there's no questions. You also have time to review it in detail, and changes can be made during the budget process. I know this is kind of where sometimes there's been resident contact with you about when their street might be repaired or things like that. So you can certainly bring those to Pat, and we can look at where they are on the inventory and that. But if there's an area of town that you think needs focus on and it's not in here, this is the time to discuss it between now and when we start voting on the budget. Great job, Brian, and I know you had a lot of help. But all of it looks
Yeah,
really good.
all the departments are involved in
Yeah,
both of
no,
these,
I
so.
know. I was happy to see the IT with the cybersecurity and stuff. I mean, just every department, you focused on the right things, so. A question?
I do have one.
Trustee O'Brien?
I just have one question, actually, in regards to the furniture for the fire station. How did that, does the loan, we pay more based on what we draw, or we just have the loan amount?
Correct. We have a loan amount up to 5.9 million, and it's based on what we draw off that.
All right, because I know our intention is to pay it off quickly, but we don't necessarily want to finance furniture for 5 years.
No, absolutely not. It looks like we'll have enough contingency built in there anyway, but in a year when the capital fund is stressed for other things, if we can afford it, we'll leave it in,
Sure.
certainly. But,
I just asked.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay, if there's no other questions, then we're going to get an update on our most exciting project in a while from Chief Kavanaugh.
Yes, so, update on Fire Station 3. The big progress that occurred since last time we were all together was we were able to get the actual roof on the apparatus bay. So this is a picture up above of the lower level, and the further back is actually the station itself. That roof is not on yet. There's a sheet metal on there, but the roofing material's there, so it's not waterproof. The top area where you see all the equipment, that actually has the roof on it, and we are waterproof in that area. So if you click to the next slide, Brian, just more of a close-up seeing what the finalized roof is. This is a little bit different than the roofs that we put on Fire Station 1. Fire Station 1's what they consider a ballast roof. So those are the ones you see the rock on, and the rock holds the membrane down. This here is actually a felt back system that is heat sealed down to the roof, and that's the final product there. So the way that looks white there and everything, that's exactly what it's gonna look like. So down the line, someday, we don't have to have the rocks removed, put back on. It's not quite as expensive a replacement program further down the line. So it's newer technology, a much better roof than what's on Fire Station 1. So if you click to the next. This is the view you kind of see when you drive by now, when you come down Route 21. As you'll see there, all the doors are covered up and all the windows are covered up. This area here, we've gone ahead and started to heat inside here. They're working in this area since the roof's on there and it's insulated. We actually started our first heater up back on January 19th, which, talking to our contractors, unheard of to start paying heating costs in January. Most with the outdoor masonry, they expected us the end of November and December to be paying for propane this entire winter. And that goes to the point what Brian was pointing out earlier with the budgets. We built a winter portion, winter costs into our budget. We've not expended that up until just now. So we're really doing real well on the budget there. That's outside of the contingency. That was actually in the budget itself. So we're doing well on budget due to the weather conditions. And then our contingency, which we reported on last time, very minor little cost changes there. We've been very fortunate up to this point in the project. So if you click to the next, Brian. This is the inside. This is the area that we're heating, the apparatus bay. They're going to be putting some smaller rooms on the side. They started pouring the floors underneath what we call the mezzanine area up there, as well as the concrete there. So they'll continue to work in here as this is heated. They'll get everything run in this area here. They are still hoping the next couple of weeks the temperature goes up and they're able to roof the station side. If you click again, Brian. The station side, they just started to sheet it. The whole outside, as of today, now has plywood on it. So we're there. We're just missing the roof. Then they'll come back in. They'll do a spray insulation here before they start heating it. At which point then they can start to build that out. They feel like they'll be able to still accomplish that in the next week or two with the weather change. The weather pattern's showing high 30s in the next 2 weeks, so let's hope that happens. This is the inside of the station itself. As you can see, there's a little freeze here. That's why we need the heat in here to thaw this all out. They'll finish the little bit of underground work they have in here, and then they'll go ahead and pour the concrete floor, and then they'll start to erect the interior walls. Once again, this is what we're shooting for. That's what it should be looking like by the end of summer. So that's a quick overview of where we're at. You're not going to see a lot of things when you drive by as much because we're pretty much sealed up for the winter. That's the goal. And then they'll be working inside. A lot of progress will happen there, so the photos of the inside will kind of be the storyteller for us.
And if the weather holds, you anticipate opening the building September?
We're probably still looking at that October type date. We
Okay.
still have a roadway project and intersection project that
Yeah,
we're
I
timing
know.
this along with. And really, the contractor was always, right now, on their time schedule, would be finishing up in August, September 1, and we still have, and I look at Chris when I say this, we still have work we're going to do. We're installing our own computers, we're putting our own equipment in there. We'll do lots of work for the final month or two on our own within the building, so I'm still thinking October.
Okay, that's still good. As far as the intersection, obviously, you know, I've tried my best, and so has our senator. Is there another alternative to a fully signalized? I mean, is it possible to do like those yellow warning lights, and so then it only comes on when, do we need the state's approval to do something like that?
We would still need the state's approval to do the warning lights, but those would be, because it's remote off, but the problem is that it's remote off the intersection. So that's why the state was reluctant to allow this one to go forward under a fire station signal warrant, an emergency purpose signal warrant. I have to double check and see if we can get warning lights, because it's still, 600 feet off the roadway.
It seems like kind of wimpy on their part. I mean, 600 feet is not that much. All right, Yeah, Senator is as frustrated as I am, with the lack of response from IDOT. So I thought maybe there's a way to do something that doesn't need IDOT's approval. Guess not.
No, it's their road.
Anything within the right of way of 21, and we're going to have to ask for IDOT.
Yeah, not ideal using warning lights, but at least then it does stop traffic to allow our vehicles to exit safely from that roadway, but
Yeah, if we're going to continue to push the state for a permit from a true safety standpoint, we would still like to
Right,
see
yeah.
the full intersection.
Yeah.
And since there's the grant dollars there to pay for it, ultimately, if we're going to push for the permit, that would be the ideal way to continue. I understand what we're hitting, but from a safety standpoint, the warning lights, it's
yeah,
better
no,
than
I
nothing,
know.
but
Yeah,
it would be
people
far
don't pay
from a safe
attention. IDOT
intersection.
may dig it just seems like IDOT's digging their heels in here and don't understand that it's a safety issue.
Mm-hmm.
All right, obviously myself and the senator will keep pushing on it if there's no other alternative. Trustee Balmas.
Just, this is really nothing to do except with the fire station. Is there a way that we think we can either name it or dedicate it to Sam?
After the meeting, can I talk to you? The fire department's working on a tribute to Chief Data right now that the guys have kind of come up with and worked on, and I just want to be careful that we don't do that. They were looking at maybe something, it would be at Station 1 where his home was and where he visited us, and they're looking at a tribute. If I could talk to you kind of offline on what we were putting out there and thinking, if that's okay. And so much to all of us, I didn't mean to. I respect that 100%, but we are working on something that we were going to come forward with as a department that, I think would recognize Chief Data the way he deserves, and, he's obviously been all of our thoughts. And
Yeah.
the last 2 weeks, I was sharing this earlier before the meeting, the amount of people that he's touched lives that I've had the opportunity to talk to on the phone from all over this country. The stories I've heard about him, the tributes everyone wishes they could make publicly on his behalf. It's been very touching. It's been a great couple of weeks. I wish everyone could hear the stories I've gotten to hear. I've shared a lot with the guys whenever I'm possible, but he really was, Gurnee is, you said in many articles.
I know,
Mayor.
his stories were the best at Gurnee Days. They just, amazing what went on before everything was so structured and governed and stuff. So it always helped me hearing about the original Gurnee, the way things used to be, and he will be missed.
Thank you.
All right, well, that was our last report. Good job. We have no old business, no new business.
Just a reminder, we got another meeting next Monday, so back-to-back meetings.
Okay. We can handle that.
Yep.
All right, there's no public here to comment, so
Make a motion.
I have a motion from trustee Balmas, second from trustee Thorstensen. I'm sorry, I always forget to look that way. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.